Well, joining me now in Prague is Golnaz Esfandiari. She's a journalist for Radio Free Europe and an Iranian analyst for Freedom House. Setareh Sadeqi is a researcher of North American studies at the University of Tehran. And lawyer Dave Jonas joins us. He worked on nuclear non-proliferation for the Pentagon under the Bush administration, and Donald Trump nominated him to be the Energy Department's legal counsel. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Golnaz Esfandiari, in the context of the relationship between Iran and the Trump administration, has Rouhani made the right decision here?
I can't speak for Rouhani whether he made the right decision or not, but what I can say that this is a worrisome development, but it was predictable. Iran has been complying with the nuclear deal. The U.S. left the deal exactly a year ago. The IAEA, the United Nations Nuclear Agency, has already 14 times, I believe, confirmed that Iran is fully complying with the deal, but Iran feels that it is not receiving any benefits from the deal because of the U.S. sanctions, and also because the EU, China, Russia have not done anything significant to compensate Tehran for its losses. So the Iranian establishment decided to take this step. What is important here is that this is a mild reaction from Tehran so far. It is concerning, but it's a mild reaction. It's not, for now, it's not a violation of the nuclear deal. It could become a violation, a technical violation, depending on how much Iran will keep a low enriched uranium and heavy water. But for now, it is not. And Iran has said, President Rouhani said that Iran it wants to keep the deal alive, but it wants some kind of benefit. So, and it has, as you know, it has given an ultimatum to European countries.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a few minutes. Dave Jonas, we heard from Golnaz. She says that the Iranians have been complying, but this is worrying and predictable now because both are pushing each other here and hurtling towards something that might be dangerous. Do you agree with that?
I think it's always problematic to assert that Iran is complying with anything after 20 years of proven non-compliance prior to the deal. And that's non-compliance with legally binding agreements like the safeguards agreement that Iran has with the IAEA, which we've just discussed a moment ago. And of course, hardly complying with the spirit of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty either. All of that is highly problematic. I think that I agree with my colleague who just mentioned that it is a somewhat mild step, but it's also an interesting step. And of course, if you asked Secretary Kerry and President Obama and those negotiators, you know, would they have contemplated or approved of this kind of a move of Iran? Well, you probably won't hear anything from them because they've been saying all along that this deal should be binding and nobody should be able to escape from it or to withdraw from it, even though it is an unsigned agreement and is not legally binding, therefore making it little more than a policy commitment. So the United States withdrawal was certainly lawful. And Iran doing this, of course, you know, if it was a legally binding agreement, you can't pick and choose like a Chinese menu and say, well, I'm going to observe Article 1, but not Article 2, and Article 4, but not Article 5. And essentially that to some extent is what Iran has chosen to do here.
But the Americans have taken them to the Chinese restaurant here, right? It developed in that context. The Americans a year ago said, we're eating Chinese. So the Iranians are now doing what they're doing. You'd accept that, Dave. This doesn't come out of nowhere.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I would accept that, and I think it's somewhat predictable.
Okay, so Setareh Sadeqi, most importantly, you're in Tehran right now. I'm curious to know whether Rouhani has the support of his people when he decides to scale back on some of these commitments. Does he?
As an Iranian, I myself and what I hear from the people, they all support because the U.S. withdrew from the deal a year ago, and the European signatories haven't done anything to stand up to the U.S., and Iran is not benefiting from the deal at all. And I should also mention that the step Iran is taking is within the framework of the JCPOA, and it's based on the Articles 26 and 36 of the deal. So we are still within the deal, unlike the U.S., who has already left and was the reason that this step came from Iran.
Okay.
So yeah, I think President Rouhani has the people's support.
Okay, so Golnaz, Tehran basically telling the Europeans, you got 2 months to sort this out. The Europeans came back, they shot back metaphorically very quickly and said, we won't be blackmailed in any way and you can't give us these ultimatums. The Russians are showing support, but is Iran being isolated because initially the thinking was that the Europeans were softer on the Iranians than the Americans. So are we seeing Iran being isolated here, Golnaz?
We have to wait and see what Europe is planning to do. As you said, Russia was critical of the US, so was China. And in general, the European countries have a number of times criticized the US for leaving the nuclear deal because they believe this is a good deal. It's not perfect, but it was preventing a crisis. It was preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons because its program, it's still being inspected by the IAEA, the United Nations Nuclear Agency. What is the problem here is that the European countries have promised Iran something that I believe it's very hard to deliver. So the EU is in a very tough spot here. They don't want a confrontation with the US, and at the same time, they have promised Iran that they will do business or they will facilitate business with Iran. But that would put EU countries at the risk of sanctions, and I don't think that they want to lose the US market. So it's a very complicated situation. And it's moving very fast, and it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, it is a very complicated situation. Dave Jonas, Sergei Lavrov saying this is an unacceptable situation created by the irresponsible behavior of the United States. Are you comfortable with the Iranians getting cushier with the Russians as a result of this?
Of course, it's really rich to hear Iran or Russia talking about irresponsible behavior from the United States when they're the ones supporting terrorism, invading other countries, and doing that kind of thing. I know it was unpopular, certainly with the EU and certainly with Iran, for the United States to pull out of this deal. But from a legal and a policy standpoint, it was absolutely acceptable and fully authorized by the deal itself as a mere policy commitment. So there's simply no issue there. Now, Iran loves giving ultimatums, and of course they play in a way with the same playbook that Russia does. They both love to poke the United States in the eye whenever they can and as often as they can. It's interesting that Iran is doing that to some degree with the EU here, giving them an ultimatum, because the EU, as any state might, when they make a decision, for example, to negotiate the deal and then stay in it, as the EU has done, they sort of want to back up their decision. And now Iran is even making it harder for the EU to maintain their position as a deal signatory. Excuse me, the deal wasn't signed, but as a member of the deal, right, a participant in the deal, a negotiator of the deal. And so it's very tough to say. The EU, I think my colleague just mentioned, there's multiple pressures now on the EU and multiple competing pressures. So how they come out on all of this in the end is difficult to say.
Dave, the United States sending warships and B-52 bombers to Iran's doorstep. Who's poking whom in the eye here?
The United States has indeed dispatched the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Battle Group. But that had nothing to do with this announcement of Iran's. That was done days earlier, and it was based on intelligence that the United States had that the Iranians were going to attack United States forces and/or facilities in the region. So they're really completely unrelated.
Okay, no, and I'm curious to hear from Setareh Sadeqi. Is it taken that way by the Iranians when Dave Jonas says, well, this has nothing to do with it, whether it's the listing of the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group, or the sanctions, or pulling out of the JCPOA, or sending the aircraft carrier. When the Americans say we need to separate out these things, do the Iranians accept that?
It's very difficult to accept. First of all, the intelligence that our colleague is talking about here comes from Mossad, Israeli intelligence services, and there's no report, like it's only what they are talking about, but there is no substantial report on it. Second, why does it come, if it's not related, why does it come at this point when, as you said, it was announced earlier? And I also need to mention that let's talk about who is supporting terrorism and who is seeking to destabilize the Middle East. Your President Trump, announced in his election campaigns that it was the U.S. who gave rise to the ISIS in the Middle East. It was the U.S. who supported the terrorists, and it was the U.S. who delisted for MEK, the terrorist group that has assassinated more than 17,000 Iranians. And they are openly supporting the terrorist group still, I mean, everywhere.
Okay.
So it's very...
Okay, so
Yeah,
hold on. So before I bring in Golnaz, Dave, one of the things I really like about the show is it's very rare, I think, Dave, for you to have the opportunity also to have dialogue with a young Iranian from Tehran who's said something to you.
Indeed.
Here's an opportunity
Indeed.
to respond to that. Respond to that, Dave.
Well, and I do appreciate that, and it is an unusual opportunity to have a dialogue with an Iranian. That's something that is not often available, so I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate your viewpoint. I do think that you have to recall, first of all, the United States doesn't support terrorist groups. I think what you were saying earlier is that President Trump noted in his campaign when he was a candidate that ISIS grew during Obama's watch because President Obama wasn't doing that much. And similarly, under the signed deal when President Obama was in office, the Iranians weren't feeling any pain or difficulty because President Obama was shipping them pallets of cash. And so what's to hurt there? But in this case, where President Trump has pulled out of the deal and is vigorously and aggressively applying multiple forms of sanctions, Iran is feeling the pain. And I think that is what has led to the action of Iran, the feeling that it is necessary to do something to let America know that it is displeased. Now, make no mistake, there are back-channel communications. I've been involved in international negotiations for a number of years as an American government official, both military and civilian. And I can tell you that there are things that are said that aren't reported. I mean, we all know one of the problems with the Iranian deal was that there were all these side deals that were kept secret that we didn't even know about. So there are back-channel communications going on right now where Iran is probably saying, look, we'll stop this or we'll pull back on this uranium enrichment and possession and heavy water manufacture if you do X. Now, that might be remove these financial sanctions or remove these other sanctions. We don't know. We can only speculate. But I can assure you that there are back-channel communications going on with this.
Right. Okay, Golnaz, as we wrap this up, the two nations are on opposite ends when it comes to multiple conflicts in the region, whether it's Syria, whether it's Yemen, whether it's the internal dynamics of Iraq or Lebanon, and so on. The US blames Iran, Iran blames the Americans. Now we have this with the nuclear deal essentially slowly being dismantled. The big question everyone has, are the two nations hurtling towards war? Is this happening right now in slow motion? Golnaz?
I certainly hope not, but the signs are worrying. As you said, the U.S. has deployed carrier and bombers in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. says there's a threat from Iran. I don't think we can dismiss that, although the U.S. has not provided any evidence. We don't know what's the evidence. But just recently, the U.S. designated a powerful Iranian military and economic organization, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, as a terrorist organization. And experts said that Iran could react by, attacking or threatening U.S. troops in the region. So it's very dangerous. And but I certainly hope that diplomacy will prevail, because I think a war in the region or a conflict between the two countries is not in the interest of the U.S. nor Iran. Iranians are one of the most pro-U.S. nation in that region, and the U.S. should be careful not to lose Iranians. That would be, I think, very bad.
Okay, well, I've got to wrap, but it's been really good talking to all of you. Golnaz Esfandiari, Setareh Sadeqi, and Dave Jonas. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.